He stands today as one of the towering figures in American entertainment, a man whose voice, humor, and unmistakable presence have woven themselves into the collective memory of millions. Tim Allen's journey is not simply the arc of a performer who made people laugh. It is the story of someone who turned pain into purpose, chaos into craft, and resilience into legacy. Across decades, he grew from a young man searching for something to hold on to into a cultural landmark whose characters still echo across generations. From the iconic Toolman who found a home in living rooms around the country to the fearless voice that shouted into infinity and beyond, Tim became more than a performer. He became a familiar comfort, a reminder of warmth and humor in a world often too heavy. Yet the man behind those roles was shaped long before the lights found him. Music, long before Hollywood. Tim was simply Timothy Allen Dick, a boy growing up in the heartbeat of a bustling household in Denver. Laughter drifted through those early days, carried by the easy confidence of a father whose footsteps made the world feel stable and known. Gerald's presence was the type of anchor a child instinctively trusts, the kind that tells you without speaking that tomorrow will be okay. His mother, Martha, stitched love into the smallest corners of their home, turning ordinary afternoons into memories that soften with time. It was not a perfect life, but it was whole, complete, safe, until the moment it WAs and single quotes T, there are losses that reshape a soul before it even fully forms. Losses that arrive too early, too sharply, too permanently. For Tim, that moment came in 1964 when he was just 11 years old. The news descended like a winter that arrived without warning, leaving nothing untouched. His father, his teacher, his guide, his hero, was suddenly gone after a tragic accident on the road. One day the world was full of possibility. The next it was marked by a silence so deep it felt unbreakable. The house that once hummed with easy banter grew quiet. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. The absence was not merely an empty chair or a quiet hallway. It was the undoing of a center. Tim later said it felt like time collapsed inward, that the spaces he once crossed without thinking became territories he tiptoed through, afraid of touching the reminder of what no longer existed. The foundation of his childhood cracked wide open, leaving him with a grief too large for a child to understand and too heavy for anyone else to carry for him. In those moments, something inside him changed. The world no longer felt predictable. The sky no longer seemed guaranteed to stay above him. Music, grief rarely arrives alone. It lingers, it folds itself into the corners of life, and it reshapes what comes next. 2 years after the loss of his father, another shift unsettled the delicate balance of his world. His mother remarried and the family moved to a new home, a new neighborhood, a new structure. On the surface, it was a chance to rebuild stability. But inside Tim's already fractured heart, it felt like an aftershock. The man who stepped into the role of stepfather brought a new order, firm, structured, unyielding. For a boy still aching with the imprint of a father he adored, seeing another man take that place carved a deeper, quieter wound. The displacement wasn't loud. It arrived in subtle fragments, the way the dinner table felt slightly off, the way routines shifted, the way he struggled to find his place in the new rhythm. The home he once knew now felt foreign, as though every familiar object had been rearranged just enough to feel out of reach. And so he learned, slowly, painfully, to keep parts of himself tucked away, to move through rooms without expectation, to brace for the moments that might hurt simply because they followed too closely behind moments that already had. But children, even wounded ones, find ways to breathe. Tim found his in the flicker of humor. What began as a small act of defiance against heaviness, a joke to lift a room, a comment to lighten a moment, grew into a shield. Humor became the way he navigated a life that no longer made sense. It became his escape and, later, his greatest compass. Behind every laugh he created, There was a quiet battle he was learning to fight with timing, wit, and a stubborn refusal to let sorrow swallow him whole. Without knowing it, he was forging the earliest pieces of a gift that would one day define him, music. As adolescence arrived, the childhood fractures didn't fade. They deepened, hardening into a restlessness he carried everywhere. College offered him a temporary reprieve. New faces, new ideas, new creative spaces invited him to explore parts of himself he'd never had room to examine. He found the microphone, the stage, the charged air of small studios, the thrill of audiences leaning just slightly closer as they waited for him to release the next line. For the first time since childhood, he felt clarity. Not safety, but direction. Comedy became a language he could trust, yet the stage lights could only illuminate so much. The unresolved ache beneath his confidence pulled him into darker corners. What began as escapes late nights, drinks shared too quickly, choices made without thought slowly spiraled into something heavier, something that followed him even after the applause faded. The double life formed almost effortlessly. The charming performer in the spotlight, the young man fumbling through the shadows after. And the more he tried to outrun the echoes of old wounds, the deeper he slipped into patterns that eroded whatever stability he had managed to create. But even as he drifted, the dream kept its grip on him. Night after night, he climbed onto stages small enough that laughter could be counted individually, large enough to hold the possibility of becoming something more. He lived from joke to joke, set to set, paycheck to paycheck. Some nights the audience roared. Others, the silence hovered like an unanswered question. But every performance, even the smallest, fed something inside him that still believed life could be rebuilt. Then came 1978, the year everything collided. A single moment at an airport, a choice born of desperation and reckless misjudgment, sent his life careening in a direction he could not undo. The arrest was a rupture, a breaking. The life he had been clinging to fell apart with startling speed, leaving him with a reality he could no longer talk his way around or laugh his way through. Faced with the consequences, he did the only thing he could, confront the truth of who he'd become and the pain he'd been navigating for years without ever naming it. Prison was not a chapter he romanticized or excused. It stripped him down to the core. No applause, no escape, no illusion. The quiet inside those cells echoed with lessons he had spent a lifetime avoiding. And yet, in the starkness of those days, a small ember began to glow. Humor, the same force that once helped him survive childhood, became a lifeline again, this time in its rawest form. A way to stay human in a place that seemed designed to erase humanity. By the time he stepped out in 1981, he carried no guarantees. No promises of success, only the clarity of someone who understood exactly what he had to leave behind. He arrived in Los Angeles at 28 with nothing but hope, grit, and a belief that a man could rebuild himself even after breaking apart. The city didn't care who he had been. It only cared who he could become. Every night on stage, every small booking, every smoky club filled with half-interested spectators chipped away at the remnants of the man he had been. He worked, he stumbled, he sharpened, and slowly, audiences began to see something in him that went deeper than jokes. They saw truth. They saw pain reshaped into laughter. They saw a survivor finding his voice, and in the years ahead, that voice would change everything. He didn't know it then, but the pieces of his future were already aligning, gathering momentum in the small rooms where he practiced timing like a craftsman and honed delivery like a man rebuilding muscle after a long injury. The 1980s became a decade of tireless grinding, of clawing forward even when progress seemed invisible. He moved between clubs with the same determination he once used to outrun grief. Except now it wasn't escape he sought, it was transformation. Under the heat of those stage lights, He learned the difference between telling a joke and revealing a truth. Audiences didn't simply laugh. They recognized something of themselves in the way he leaned into vulnerability, using humor to thread together the fragile pieces of human experience. There was a rhythm to his rise, slow at first, then building, then quickening until suddenly larger venues began calling, late-night shows extended invitations, and Hollywood took notice of the man whose voice seemed both familiar and fresh. Each opportunity arrived not as a gift, but as a milestone earned through thousands of small, unseen steps, music. Then came the role that would turn the tide, Tim the Toolman Taylor. When ABC offered him the chance to bring a character loosely shaped by his own comedic persona to life, he stepped into a world he had once only imagined from the periphery. What happened next wasn't simply success, it was a cultural ignition. Home Improvement erupted onto American television with an energy that felt both new and comfortably nostalgic. Every week, millions gathered to watch the story of a well-meaning, accident-prone dad trying to navigate family life with a blend of stubbornness, heart, and comedic chaos. Tim's portrayal resonated because it was true. Not factual truth, but emotional truth, the kind shaped by years of learning how fragile family can be, and how deeply love can hold even through imperfection. Viewers connected not only to what made them laugh, but to what made them feel seen. The show became a touchstone, a fixture of American evenings, a mirror reflecting both the humor and tenderness of domestic life. Tim embodied the father figure he had once lost too soon, offering the world a character who stumbled constantly, but always found his footing with heart. As ratings soared, so did expectations. By the height of the series, he stood among the most recognizable and highest-paid actors on television, a testament to how far he had climbed from the young man struggling in smoky clubs. But even as the spotlight intensified, he carried his gratitude quietly, rarely forgetting the broken chapters that shaped him, music, and then, almost unbelievably, another transformation waited just around the corner. In 1994, Tim stepped into the boots of a character who would change his cultural footprint forever, Scott Calvin, the man who becomes Santa Claus. What began as a heartfelt family film evolved into a holiday tradition, embraced year after year. The warmth, humor, and quiet soulfulness he brought to the role forged a connection with audiences that transcended the screen. Children who grew up watching the film still revisit it decades later, sharing it with their own families. It wasn't simply a movie. It became part of the emotional fabric of the season. Just a year later, he brought life to another icon, one made not of flesh but of imagination. Buzz Lightyear, a voice that needed strength, confidence, charm, and a spark of wonder. Tim stepped behind the microphone and delivered a performance that resonated across generations. Toy Story wasn't just an innovation in animation. It was a revolution in storytelling. And at its center stood a character driven by courage and conviction, voiced with a sincerity that made him unforgettable. Buzz became more than a toy. He became a symbol of bravery and aspiration. Children echoed his signature lines across playgrounds, bedrooms, and movie theaters for decades. And every time Tim stepped into that role, he carried a little of his own journey with him, a reminder that even when you fall, the sky still waits, music with each passing year. His body of work expanded like a living tapestry. Comedy, family films, drama, commercials, narration, he brought the same authenticity to each. Galaxy Quest showcased his comedic precision while revealing layers of unexpected depth. Jungle 2, Jungle and Christmas with the Cranks offered family warmth wrapped in laughter. Even the Pure Michigan campaign became iconic, his voice guiding listeners through images of forests, lakes, and landscapes with a soothing steadiness that felt like the voice of a trusted companion. Through each project, he demonstrated a range shaped by experience rather than training alone, a versatility earned through the long path he had walked, but every story evolves. In 2011, he returned to television with a new energy. Last Man Standing became a second chapter of his television legacy, a role built not around chaos, but around perspective. This time, he played a man older, wiser, sharper, carrying humor that had matured with time. The show resonated because it reflected the evolution of its star. Gone was the frantic pace of a young father struggling to keep up. In its place stood a man tempered by life, shaped by parenting, challenges, success, and reflection. For 9 seasons, he anchored the series with a grounded strength that came not from character but from life lived, music. Yet for all the triumphs, Tim's journey was never framed only by applause. Fame, as bright as it shines, casts shadows. There were periods when attention came not from admiration but from critique, when moments of misjudgment or misunderstanding drew scrutiny he had not anticipated. But rather than meet pressure with defensiveness, he met it with introspection. He stepped back, listened, learned, and recalibrated. The storms did not define him. They refined him. They shaped him into a man more aware of his words, more conscious of responsibility, more grounded in humility. Behind the scenes, relationships shifted. Some strengthened, some strained, some eventually mended over time. He learned that fame can complicate even the closest bonds, and that communication, imperfect but earnest, remains the only bridge through these moments. With each challenge, he leaned on the tools he had forged long ago: humor as healing, honesty as compass, and resilience as anchor. Music. As the years moved forward, the phase of life he entered was not marked by pursuit, but by appreciation. Success no longer meant conquering, it meant savoring. Recognition no longer meant validation, it meant gratitude. He began to understand the quiet wisdom of endurance, that a life shaped by storms can become a place of refuge, if one chooses to keep walking forward. And Tim Allen, after walking through loss, mistakes, reinvention, and triumph, finally found himself able to breathe in the peace he had chased for decades. This was no longer the story of a man climbing. It was the story of a man arriving at a chapter filled with reflection, stability, and the unmistakable warmth of a life rebuilt from the deepest fractures. He entered the next chapter of his life not with the urgency that once pushed him through clubs, studios, and sound stages, but with a steadiness that came from knowing what truly mattered. And in that quiet turning of the page, love found him again, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the gentle persistence of something meant to arrive exactly when a person is ready to receive it. Jane. Hydoke had been in his orbit for years, a calm presence during moments when his life was still marked by imbalance and lingering shadows. She didn't see him as the face of hit sitcoms or record-setting movies. She saw the man who had survived storms, the father trying to heal old wounds, the human being beneath the fame who still questioned whether he had earned the stability he longed for. Their early connection began as a subtle thread: respect, understanding, and the rare comfort of being seen without needing to perform. Gradually, their lives aligned, not in the sweep of grand gestures, but in the delicate accumulation of quiet moments, conversations after long work days, laughter shared over simple meals, peaceful evenings spent without the burden of having to impress. Jane entered his world not to fix him, but to walk beside him as he navigated the complexities of what it meant to rebuild trust in relationships. She became a grounding force, the steady beat in a life that had once been defined by extremes. Music. By the early 2000s, their bond had deepened into something unmistakable. In 2006, they married in an intimate ceremony that reflected who they were: private, thoughtful, deeply connected. It wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the continuation of a journey marked by honesty, vulnerability, and commitment. For Tim, who had once felt the weight of losing a family, this new chapter offered a chance to build with intention rather than fear. When their daughter Elizabeth was born in 2009, something shifted inside him. He was in his mid-50s, an age when many men start stepping away from the responsibilities of early fatherhood. But for him, it felt like a rare gift, one he approached with reverence. Holding his newborn daughter, he realized that life sometimes gives second chances not to rewrite the past, but to experience the present with deeper awareness. He wasn't the young man still wrestling with unresolved grief. He was older, steadier, more attuned to the fragile beauty of raising a child. Tim embraced fatherhood with a gentleness, shaped by everything he had endured. He understood the preciousness of presence. He learned to prioritize moments that would not return: bedtime stories, school events, quiet breakfasts, and the undramatic but meaningful rituals that knit a family together. He became not just a provider, but a participant. Not a performer, but a father fully engaged. Music, yet love, as enduring as it can be, is not immune to strain. Fame continued to demand time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. Scripts, shoots, commitments, each pulled at the edges of the family he was determined to protect. And then came the night that quietly altered everything. Not in the dramatic way that headlines often portray, but in the subtle, piercing way life delivers its most important lessons. He returned home late, too late. Exhausted, worn down, distracted by the familiar pull of old habits he had fought hard to leave behind. He wasn't intoxicated. He wasn't reckless. But Jane knew him too well to ignore the signs, the haunted look, the jumpiness, the unmistakable tension of a man who had been standing at the edge of a precipice he thought he had long ago sealed off. Sobriety had been a lifeline for him for years, but that night exposed a truth he needed to face. Recovery isn't a finish line. It is a daily choice. Jane didn't confront him with anger or accusation. She held their daughter gently, the lamp casting a soft glow over her exhausted face, and asked only one question, one that would echo in him long after her voice faded into the silence of the room. "Are you still choosing us?" The simplicity of those words broke something open. They forced him to confront the possibility that patterns once left behind could return if he stopped paying attention. And more importantly, they reminded him that losing presence is a kind of loss all its own. A father doesn't have to disappear physically for a child to feel abandoned. A husband doesn't need to walk away for distance to form. That night became a pivot point, a moment when the man he had spent decades trying to become stood face to face with the man he feared he might still be. And instead of retreating into denial or self-protection, he chose clarity. He chose honesty. He chose them, music. In the weeks that followed, their home became a place of deliberate healing. Tim recommitted to sobriety, not from fear, but from love. Therapy became less about crisis management and more about understanding the threads of his story that still carried tension. He made choices that reflected priority rather than convenience, staying home when he could, being present when it mattered most, listening without defensiveness, speaking without walls. Little by little, the fractures that had begun to form mended. Jane's trust wasn't rebuilt in a single moment. It grew through consistent actions, through the morning coffee he prepared before she woke, through the dinners he didn't miss, through the softness he brought to conversations that would once have overwhelmed him. And with time, the atmosphere of their home shifted again. The laughter returned. The warmth settled back into the walls. Their marriage, strengthened not by perfection but by persistence, became a testament to what love can endure when both people choose to show up. Music. The years that followed unfolded with a different rhythm. Tim no longer chased achievement. He embraced intention. His career continued with purpose, but never at the cost of the life he had built. He chose roles that aligned with the man he had become. He declined opportunities that would pull him too far from home. And as he stepped into his 60s and beyond, something remarkable happened. Peace found him. This peace wasn't the result of wealth or fame. It was the outcome of inner stillness, the kind that grows only after a person confronts their shadows and refuses to let them dictate the future. He moved into a chapter defined by family dinners, early mornings on the porch, walks with Jane along the California coast, and cherished weekends with both daughters. He discovered joy not in applause, but in the small, steady rituals of a life well tended. His home became a reflection of that calm, a place where the ocean stretched into the horizon, where light filtered through tall windows, where memories filled rooms that once felt too big. His garage part sanctuary, part museum held machines that whispered stories of perseverance and gratitude. His library, quiet and intimate, contained journals, scripts, and reflections marking a life examined honestly. And for the first time, perhaps in all his years, he was able to say he felt whole. This was no longer the story of a man running from something or chasing something. It was the story of a man finally walking in step with himself. He moved into a chapter of life shaped less by ambition and more by gratitude, a period when he finally allowed himself to breathe without measuring the distance he had traveled. At 72, Tim Allen stands inside a world he spent decades building with equal parts triumph and humility. And while the public may know the characters he played, the box office numbers, the iconic catchphrases, what truly defines this era is the quiet contentment that threads through his days. It is the peace that comes only after a man survives the hardest parts of his own story and learns to honor the life he has now with reverence. The success he earned, every show, every film, every voice that resonated with audiences has given him a level of stability he once believed belonged to other people. His net worth, often spoken of in numerical terms, is not the product of excess but of endurance. It symbolizes the long climb from a boyhood cracked by loss, a young adulthood shaped by mistakes, and a middle age forged by transformation. His wealth is not flashy, despite the headlines that occasionally attempt to paint it so. It is quiet, intentional, a reflection of a man who understands the value of what he nearly lost and what he ultimately reclaimed. His home on the Monterey Peninsula sits like a sanctuary facing the vastness of the Pacific, an expanse that mirrors the internal calm he has cultivated. The structure rises with the clean lines and natural elements of a place designed not to impress, but to soothe. Cypress trees bend toward the coastline as if bowing to the rhythm of the wind. Inside, sunlight cascades through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting warm gold across the stone and wood. The air carries the scent of salt and cedar. The silence is not empty. It is alive with memory. Every corner of the house seems shaped by intention. The living space, open and airy, invites conversation and rest. The kitchen, where he often stands in the early morning hours, warming his hands around a cup of coffee, faces the ocean. He has called it his quiet ritual, the moment he watches the day unfold and reminds himself of all he once feared he might never experience. Beyond the living areas, a small library waits behind a sliding wooden door. It is not grand, but deeply personal. Shelves hold scripts, notebooks, projects abandoned and resurrected, and journals filled with reflections from nights when he struggled to understand himself and mornings when clarity finally arrived. Across the property, small paths cut through gardens shaped by stone and wildflowers. The sound of distant waves creates a natural soundtrack that follows him as he walks these trails with Jane, their steps falling in rhythm with the gentle hush of the sea. These are not the walks of a man trying to escape his past. They are the walks of a man at ease, someone who realizes that the storms that once defined him no longer dictate the frame of his life. Music, and then, of course, there is the garage. To some, it might look like a treasure trove of automotive history, rare vehicles, restored classics, the kinds of cars that enthusiasts spend entire lifetimes searching for. But to him, the garage is something more intimate. It is a map of memory arranged in steel, chrome, and motion. Over the years, his love for mechanical craftsmanship never dulled. It simply evolved. He speaks of machines the way some speak of old friends, with fondness, nostalgia, and a touch of awe. His 1966 Ferrari 330 GTC glows beneath soft lights as if frozen in a moment of elegance. Beside it, the 1965 Shelby Cobra waits like a legend resting between races, its history humming quietly beneath the hood. And lighting the back wall, modest vehicles from his early days, cars purchased before wealth, before fame, before stability, stand as symbols of a young man who dared to dream beyond the limits of his circumstances. He keeps them not for prestige, but for remembrance. They remind him where he started, who he once was, and how far resilience can carry a person willing to rebuild. Each car holds a story. A Corvette purchased after a year of sobriety, a milestone captured not in celebration, but in gratitude. A classic Ford restored during a period of introspection, its renewal mirroring his own. A vintage truck kept for no other reason than it evokes the image of his father, a quiet tribute tucked into chrome and memory. To anyone else, the vehicles might seem rare collector's items. To him, they are chapters of his life embodied in metal, music, outside the garage. The property extends in gentle layers, guest houses tucked behind greenery, small studio spaces for reading lines or tinkering with ideas, decks built to face sunsets that spread across the sky like fading brushstrokes. On warm evenings, he often steps outside, just as the horizon changes colors, taking in the stillness that has become a companion rather than a stranger. The ocean breathes, steady and eternal, and he stands there remembering the years when he doubted he would ever reach such a chapter of calm within the house. The rhythm is peaceful. Life circulates not around production schedules or industry demands, but around the simple joys of everyday living. Breakfast cooked without rush, evenings spent reading, occasional trips into town with Jane, where their anonymity is respected, and moments, small, ordinary, deeply cherished, when their daughter Elizabeth curls up beside him on the couch. Her presence a reminder of the father he once feared he might not become. Music, his relationship with Catherine, his oldest daughter, has grown into one of quiet companionship. She visits often, each moment threaded with the warmth of time not lost but renewed. Their conversations are unhurried. Their laughter comes easily. And the man who once missed far too many dinners now savors every chance to be present in the lives of both his children. At 72, his health reflects years of conscious effort. Simple meals, mindful routines, long walks along the cliffs, and a sobriety that has remained steadfast for more than 2 decades. He no longer carries the frantic energy of youth, nor the shadows that once cloaked him in uncertainty. Instead, he carries steadiness, intention, a sense of responsibility not only to his family, but to the life he has fought to. Honor, he has said many times that forgiveness was one of the most transformative lessons he ever learned. Not the forgiveness he sought from others, though he understands the weight of that, too, but the forgiveness he extended to the world. When he let go of the anger surrounding his father's death, he described it as releasing a burden that had lived inside him for decades. This act of letting go softened something in him. It expanded his capacity for compassion. Through that compassion, he found purpose in giving back quietly. He supports programs dedicated to youth resilience, recovery, and homelessness. He does so without looking for cameras or praise, believing firmly that the most meaningful kindness is the kind done silently. Between philanthropy events and personal contributions, he holds close the idea that lives can be changed in small, steady ways, much like his own life was shaped by moments of unexpected guidance, music, and now. In the calmest stretch of his life, he reflects often not with regret, but with clarity. He speaks more about legacy these days, about the impact he hopes to leave behind. Not through money or fame, but through the example of transformation. He wants his daughters to know that change is possible, that no mistake defines a person forever, that resilience is not the absence of struggle, but the decision to rise again and again. He understands now that the story of his life was never about perfection. It was about the willingness to evolve, the courage to confront old wounds, the perseverance to rebuild, and the grace to love and be loved more deeply than he once believed himself capable of. As he moves through the rooms of his home, the spaces filled with memories, laughter, and the quiet breath of the ocean outside, he carries a peace that feels earned in every sense of the word. This is not a life built without storms. This is a life built after them, a life defined not by the applause of millions, but by the gentle presence of the people who walk beside him now, a life that stands as a testament to the truth. Even long after the hardest chapters, healing still arrives. He wakes earlier these days, often before the first edges of sunlight slip over the horizon. The house is silent in those moments, the ocean still dark under the fading night sky. He moves quietly through the kitchen, familiar with the way the floorboards settle, with the soft hum of the refrigerator, with the comfort of a space that finally feels fully his. As the coffee brews, he leans against the counter, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves outside. These mornings have become a sacred ritual, a moment of grounding before the day begins, a moment that reminds him of how different life once felt, how far he has come from the chaos that once defined him. At 72, the world no longer expects him to run. And for the first time, he has no desire to. Music. Jane eventually joins him, her footsteps soft against the warm wood. They share a quiet smile, one that speaks more clearly than words ever could. Their mornings rarely begin with long conversations. Instead, they unfold in a calm exchange of glances, coffee passed, newspapers opened, an easy silence that has been earned through years of learning each other's rhythms. Tim has said more than once that peace is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of understanding. And in these quiet hours, that understanding fills the room. As the day brightens, the house slowly stirs to life. Elizabeth pads down the hall, still half awake, wrapped in the softness of childhood that Tim cherishes with a kind of reverence shaped by everything he once lost too early. He watches her with quiet awe, seeing in her both the innocence he once carried and the stability he never had at her age. He makes her breakfast something simple, eggs or pancakes, and listens as she tells him about school, her friends, her plans. He doesn't rush her. He doesn't correct her. He simply listens, because he remembers all too well the feeling of not being heard. These breakfasts have become one of the greatest treasures of his later years. Not because they are profound, but because they are ordinary. And ordinary for a man whose life has been marked by extremes is the greatest gift of all, music, once the morning settles. Tim sometimes heads to his workshop, a space tucked behind the home that carries the echoes of 1,000 quiet hours. Tools line the walls with precision. Projects in various stages of completion rest on the sturdy benches. The soft scent of sawdust mixes with the faint trace of machine oil. This is where the old version of himself meets the new. Here, he is not an actor, not a public figure, not a name recognized by millions. He is simply a man who loves creating something with his hands. The repetition, the craftsmanship, the focus, it all reminds him of simpler days, of the grounding power of doing something tangible. He has always said that fixing things taught him how to understand the world, not because the world can be repaired as easily as a broken tool, but because the process of trying reveals how much patience a person carries within themselves. Here in his workshop, He rediscovers that patience daily. Sometimes he tinkers with one of his cars, tightening a bolt, polishing a detail, restoring a piece that time has worn. Sometimes he works on small projects for the house frames, shelves, decorations layered with meaning. And sometimes he simply stands in the doorway, taking in the space that holds so many pieces of his life story. Music. As the afternoon unfolds, the tempo of his day varies. Some days he reviews scripts, carefully choosing roles that align with the life he wants now, not the pace he once maintained. He is selective not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. He knows what matters. He knows which projects offer joy rather than stress. He knows what kind of environment nurtures him instead of draining him. He has lived enough life to understand the importance of choosing peace. If he takes a role now, it is because the story speaks to him, because the character carries something meaningful, because the work aligns with the balance he protects. He loves acting, still loves the craft, the collaboration, the chance to bring truth to a character. But he no longer sacrifices presence for performance. That is a lesson he learned the hard way, on quieter afternoons. He walks the cliffs with Jane. The path winds through brush and trees shaped by the coastal wind, leading to stretches of open views where the Pacific reaches endlessly into the distance. These walks remind him of the long stretches of life he once believed would be defined by turmoil. Now, he realizes even a man who has walked through storms can reach a horizon marked by calm. Jane often slips her hand into his as they walk, and he holds it gently, aware of the weight she helped him set down over the years. Music. As the sun begins to lower, the house fills with a warmer kind of energy. Elizabeth returns from her day, bringing with her the spark that only a child can carry. Tim meets her in the kitchen, asking questions he once never had time to ask. They talk about her dreams, her homework, the small victories and disappointments that shape the days of youth. He listens closely because he knows she will only be this age once, and because the memory of his own lost father never leaves him fully. Every moment with her feels like an opportunity to rewrite a chapter that once ended too soon. Dinner is often simple, homemade, shared with the ease of a family that understands each other's rhythms. Jane and Tim move through the kitchen like dance partners, one stirring, one chopping, one reaching for a plate while the other sets the table. There is no tension, no hurry, just the soft hum of conversation and the comfort of knowing they have built something resilient. Sometimes Catherine joins them, her presence bringing a deeper satisfaction to Tim's heart. Seeing both his daughters together, the beginnings of a legacy rooted not in fame, but in love, fills him with a gratitude he cannot always put into words. They talk about life, memories, future plans, small joys, and gentle hopes. For Tim, these dinners are not simply meals. They are moments that repair what once felt unrepairable. Music, evenings unfold in calm layers. After dinner, Tim often finds himself in the living room with his family, a fire glowing softly in the fireplace. They might watch a movie, flip through photo albums, or simply talk as the sky darkens outside. There is no schedule, no need to be somewhere else, no rush toward tomorrow. The man who once raced through life now savors the slowest hours. Later, when the house grows quiet again, he sometimes returns to the terrace. The night air drifts across the cliffs, carrying the scent of the sea and the hush of distant waves. He stands at the railing, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny fragments of possibility, and reflects on how profoundly his life has changed. The boy who lost a father, the young man who stumbled into darkness, the performer who climbed toward success with equal parts hope and desperation, the husband who struggled, the father who worried he might break what he loved, the human being who rebuilt himself piece by piece. Every version of him stands in the quiet of those nights, layered into the man he is now. Music, sometimes. During these late hours, he writes reflections, memories. thoughts he hopes will guide his daughters someday. He writes not as a celebrity, but as a man who has lived a life full of lessons many learned the hard way. He writes about forgiveness, about resilience, about the importance of choosing love even when fear makes it difficult. He writes about the beauty of second chances and the courage it takes to honor them. And as he closes his journal each night, he carries with him a profound sense of peace. Not a perfect peace life never grants that, but a peace built from honesty, humility, and the deep, grounding truth that he has become the man he once hoped he could be. This is the era of his life not defined by applause, but by presence, not by fame, but by family, not by noise, but by clarity, it is the quiet chapter, the healed chapter, the chapter he earned. As the years continue to unfold, Tim finds himself reflecting on the way time shapes a man, not through the milestones the world celebrates, but through the small, almost imperceptible shifts that slowly change the heart. At 72, he understands his life in a way he never could have in his youth. Not as a timeline of events, but as a tapestry woven from struggle, perseverance, laughter, regret, healing, and the steady grip of love. Each thread carries its own story. Each shadow carries its own lesson. And each moment of grace carries its own quiet miracle. There are days when he sits with Jane on the back terrace, the ocean stretching beyond them like an endless sheet of silver. They talk about nothing in particular, weather, plans for the week, what Elizabeth said that made them laugh earlier. Yet within those seemingly simple exchanges lies a profound truth. Connection doesn't require grand declarations. It thrives in constancy, in presence, in the shared heartbeat of a life built together, one ordinary day at a time. Music. He thinks often about the weight he carried for so many years without realizing how heavy it truly was. The grief of losing the father too young, the confusion of navigating a restructured family, the gnawing ache of choices that spiraled into consequences he never anticipated, and then the long, hard climb out of the darkness that threatened to define him. For a long time, he believed those early chapters were weaknesses, flaws he needed to hide. But now he sees them differently. Now he understands they were the forge where his resilience was shaped. Pain, he has learned, is not something a person simply leaves behind. It's something they learn to integrate, to understand, to transform. It becomes a guide, a reminder, a source of empathy. It has made him more patient, more forgiving, more aware of the fragility of every human story, and he no longer runs from it. Instead, he honors it because it helped him grow into someone capable of appreciating the peace he now protects fiercely. Music, throughout his home. Photographs trace the arc of his life, pictures from productions, snapshots with co-stars, candid moments from sets across decades. But the images that mean the most are not those tied to fame. They are the ones taken in kitchens, on beaches, in backyards, at family gatherings. A photo of Catherine as a child, laughing as he lifts her into the air. A picture of Elizabeth standing on a stool helping him stir cookie dough. A framed moment of him and Jane at a small cafe, both smiling in a way that reflects years of shared healing. He often stops to look at these images, feeling a quiet swell of gratitude for the second chances he was given, not just in career, but in life. He knows how easily things could have broken beyond repair. He knows how fortunate he is to stand where he stands now, surrounded by love he once took for granted and stability he once feared he couldn't maintain. Music. When friends visit, the house fills with laughter. Old castmates, neighbors, colleagues, people who have walked alongside him at various points on his journey. They gather around the outdoor table, sharing stories from their early days in the industry, reminiscing about moments that now feel almost mythical. Tim enjoys these gatherings not because they celebrate his achievements, but because they remind him of the people who shaped him along the way. He has always said that the best part of success is the relationships forged in the middle of it. The camaraderie built on long hours, shared challenges, and mutual respect. Some of those friendships have lasted decades, deepening over time. Others faded naturally, their presence meaningful but brief. But all of them contributed something, a lesson, a memory, a moment of support when he needed it most. Music and quieter conversations. He sometimes talks about the early days of his career, the nights when the audience was small enough to count, when he doubted whether he had any chance of making it, when the weight of his mistakes felt too heavy to outrun. He speaks about those years not with shame, but with honesty. He knows they shaped him. He knows they strengthened him. And he knows that without them, the man he became later would not exist. He shares these stories with Catherine and Elizabeth too, not to burden them, but to remind them that growth is possible even when life offers little clarity. He wants them to understand that resilience is not a trait, it is a choice. A choice made again and again. Even on the days when the path forward seems impossible to see, he tells them, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going. And they listen, not because he is famous, but because he is their father and his words come from a place of lived truth, music at times. He reflects on the years when criticism clouded parts of his public life. The misunderstandings, the missteps, the moments when his words were interpreted differently than he intended. He remembers the discomfort of being under a microscope, the pressure to defend himself or stay silent. And what he chose, more often than not, was introspection, growth, a deeper understanding of how his experiences shaped his perspective and how others' experiences shaped theirs. He learned that intention does not erase impact, that kindness must be active, not passive, that listening is sometimes the only meaningful response. These realizations softened him. They expanded his capacity for empathy. They made him a better father, a better husband, a better man. And while he cannot rewrite the past, he has embraced the opportunity to improve the present, music. His philanthropic efforts continue quietly behind the scenes. He supports recovery programs because he understands the courage required to step away from addiction. He supports youth outreach organizations because he knows the pain of feeling lost at a young age. He supports homelessness initiatives because he recognizes that stability is a privilege, not a guarantee. He doesn't chase recognition for these efforts. He doesn't issue statements or seek public credit. He believes deeply that the work matters most when it is done without expectation, when it is rooted in compassion rather than performance, when it offers dignity without needing applause. Music. As evening settles in his home, the routine becomes a gentle procession. Lights are dimmed, dishes are washed, books are pulled from shelves. Elizabeth settles in to read, her voice carrying softly down the hallway. Jane finishes tasks in the kitchen, humming under her breath. And Tim steps outside once more, drawn to the terrace where the ocean waits. He stands there in the cool air, hands resting on the railing, watching the last light of day fade behind the horizon. He breathes deeply, filling his lungs with the scent of salt and drifting wind. In these quiet minutes, he often thinks of his father, not with the sharp pain that once defined the memory, but with warmth. He wishes he could show him this life, this family, this peace. He wishes he could sit with him in this place and talk about everything he has learned, but even in absence, there is connection. Tim believes that his father would be proud not because of the career, but because of the man he became despite the brokenness, because he chose to rise, because he chose to love, because he chose to fight for the life he wanted instead of surrendering to the one that once trapped him. Music before bed. He sometimes returns to his journal. He writes about gratitude, how it feels to wake with purpose, how it feels to be loved with patience, how it feels to stand on the other side of storms he once believed would never pass. He writes for himself, for his daughters, for the version of him who once doubted he would survive long enough to see old age. His entries end the same way each night, with a promise to remain present, to remain humble, to remain grateful. And as he closes the journal and turns off the light, he carries that promise with him into the quiet of his home. This is the life he built. This is the peace he earned. This is the chapter he once feared he would never reach, and the one he now cherishes more deeply than any before it.